a crisis, any crisis. Your choices include the two hot wars we are still in, or the perpetual Israeli-Palestinian crisis, or whatever it is that we've got going on in Pakistan that we don't call a war. President Obama got to all of that, presumably today, at a meeting of his military brain trust. The president's first 33 hours have given some indication of how much he will correct the Bush administration's foreign policy course from the last 8 years. On the changey side of things, there was Barack Obama's inaugural address, in which he not only made a measured offer of respect and conciliation toward the Muslim world, he also became the first president to ever say the word Muslim in an inaugural address. There was also some ostensible change in President Obama's day one call list as well. Rather than phoning leaders of reliably friendly, peaceful places like Canada or England, the president instead rang leaders of Egypt and Jordan and Israel and the Palestinian Authority to talk about next steps for peace in their regions. Also, aides said later in the day, Obama will name George Mitchell the special envoy for the Middle East as of tomorrow. So, action. Change, sort of. Neat. That said, at 4:15 Eastern today, the president made good on a day one in office promise from July. He met with military leaders to discuss his 16-month timetable to get troops out of Iraq. Among the brain trust, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, U.S. Ambassador in Iraq Ryan Crocker, and Generals David Petraeus and Ray Odierno. If you are thinking that that is remarkably similar to President Bush's military brain trust, you are correct. The same brain trust whose most recent timetable for withdrawal from Iraq was longer than President Obama's 16-month target. Also not particularly change-like, then President Bush made a deal in his final day in office with Israel about the terms of Israel's relationship with Gaza. I'm sorry, it wasn't his last day in office. It was within his last few days in office. My mistake. The U.S. under President Obama is bound by that last-minute agreement between the U.S. and Israel, and a statement from Press Secretary Robert Gibbs today says that President Obama supports the agreement fully. Also today, regarding Afghanistan, or Talibanistan, depending on what part of it you're talking about, the main supply route for our troops goes through Pakistan's Khyber Pass. It is in constant peril. It had to be closed a few weeks ago. It has been announced that the United States expects to have the use of new supply routes for our troops in Afghanistan. They are sort of Russian. Via Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Kyrgyzstan, also known in my head as Soviet Demisistan. Not only are these the same routes that the Soviet Union used to supply its troops during its 10-year occupation of Afghanistan, not only do Afghans remember and loathe the 10-year Soviet occupation, but the 10-year Soviet occupation of Afghanistan arguably sort of sank the Soviet Union. And we're going to do it like they did it? Also, 30,000 more troops? Where is the Obama military policy going to go exactly, and what are the big debates going to be about? Joining us now is Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri. She serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator McCaskill, so nice to see you in person.
Thank you.
So the U.S. is going to start transporting supplies to our troops in Afghanistan through the same places that Russia used to supply its troops with the help of Russia. Even if this were fiction, this would be foreshadowing of something bad about to happen in the third act of the book. Are you concerned about us falling into the same traps that the Soviet Union did in their long-term occupation of that country?
Well, I think what this really represents, Rachel, is a pragmatic problem that we've got to solve, and that's how do we get supplies to support the NATO forces that are there. They have to have supplies. We've got to support them and protect them as they do their work for NATO. And if we can't get through the Khyber Pass because the Pakistanis now are refusing to drive the trucks because of how dangerous it is. The failure, that's what's really, this, to me, the thing we have to really watch is the Pakistani government and how much are they really doing to help us in this fight in that Khyber area to make sure we can get those supply routes through. So getting concessions from Russia to be able to move our supply routes through their territories probably is a help to us because it gives us another option that could be safe if we got into trouble in terms of getting our supplies in there to the NATO folks.
The success of our efforts in Afghanistan, and we should talk about what success looks like in Afghanistan, but what we are trying to do there depends so much on what happens in Pakistan. How concerned are you that the Pakistani government may not be capable, even if they wanted to, they had all the will in the world, they may just not be stable enough or have enough power to do what we need them to do to allow us to do what we want to do in Afghanistan?
Well, I am very concerned about it, and I know that our president is very concerned about it. One of the things that's gotten us in trouble in terms of our foreign policy all across the world has been the tunnel vision we've had in Iraq. That's why I'm so glad that he kept a lot of promises today. He's got a lot to keep, but he kept a lot today on ethics, on transparency, and on meeting with the military leaders, listening to them, but most importantly saying the policy I am setting is we must get out of Iraq as quickly and as reasonable as we can, hopefully 1 brigade a month over the next 16 months.
In Afghanistan, adding these combat brigades that we are adding now is a decision that makes tactical sense to me in terms of who we've got there now, what their mission is, and what sort of resistance they're facing, what their tasks are. That is tactical. What I am hoping to hear from President Obama is a clear statement of what our goals are in Afghanistan, what success would look like. Do you feel like you already know what the answer is to that question, or are you waiting for direction from President Obama?
Well, I think it's one of those problems because what we're really worried about in Afghanistan it's the Taliban, it's the terrorists that are really beginning to ramp up, muscle up in that region. That's where, in fact, all of these military leaders you just referenced, even when President Bush was here, they admitted that it wasn't Iraq that was a danger to the United States. It was what's going on in Afghanistan. So I think he has to keep our world safe from this terrorist threat. I think we have to support NATO. Now, one thing that I think this president will do that George Bush was not successful in doing, that is strengthening our alliances with all the NATO countries so that they do more of the heavy lifting. We have done so much heavy lifting, our country has, in this region, without the kind of help that, frankly, we must have if we're going to be successful.
Do we bring more people on board, more other countries, more allies on board, if we define our goals narrowly as counterterrorism, instead of even what progressives define it as now often, which is counterinsurgency? Counterinsurgency, if you read the doctrine sort of literally by the people who are writing the new counterinsurgency field manual and stuff, they say we need 600,000 people in Afghanistan to build that government, to provide total security, to do complete counterinsurgency. I mean, counterterrorism is sort of a police mission on steroids. It's a very different idea, much more narrow goal.
And I'll tell you, that is what begins to strike fear in my heart. If we start doing reconstruction, like we did in Iraq, this is when I put my fiscal hat on. As you know, I spent a lot of time looking at war contracting and what went wrong in Iraq. Literally hundreds of billions of dollars up in smoke, fraud, waste, abuse. And a lot of it was through this idea that we could go into a country in chaos and somehow rebuild everything and nobody was going to blow it up. That's what we've got to be careful about. I think if the more we focus on the terrorism, I think the more buy-in we get from nations around the world and the more success we may have. I'm not sure. We haven't heard what President Obama is going to say about that. Right. And I'm anxious to be supportive of his vision as it relates to foreign policy. But in my eyes, we've got to be very careful about rebuilding another country unless it's stable enough to actually accept that rebuilding and not have it just be wasted.
It is a complicated situation, and we need a big, smart, loud debate about it. Whenever you or any member of the Senate Armed Services Committee wants to talk about it, I hope you will consider coming back on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator McCaskill.
Nice to see you.